Welcome to Corwin's Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast with host Peter DeWitt. This podcast is from education leaders for education leaders. Every week, Peter and our guests get together to share ideas, put research into practice, and ensure every student is learning, not by chance, but by design.
Hi, Ariel. How was your weekend?
Hey, Peter. It was pretty good. We did a lot of yard work now that it's spring, just had to clear out the weeds and trying to get ahead of all that.
Well, that's nice because in upstate New York, I'm always a little bit worried about snow until probably the end of April, early May. We have gotten snowstorms in May before, so
oh my gosh,
I'm always very cautious. So this podcast that people are about to listen to, this particular segment is SEL from a Distance with John and Jessica Hannigan. They are very real, which yes. I appreciate. They're quite the dynamic duo. But what do you think about what people are going to hear?
Well, I just love that this, the book and everything that they share in this episode really comes from their own experience during pandemic parenting. And social emotional learning just feels like the topic we all need right now. I don't know a single person who's not overwhelmed, and they talk about just the importance, really the imperative of taking care of ourselves, not just our students, but also ourselves as teachers and leaders too. And I think everyone needs that message loud and clear right now.
Yeah. And I definitely, when people are listening to this, I just want, and I know they're going to hear me talk about it in the interview, but what I appreciate about John and Jess is that they have a proactive approach. The work that they do, whether it's, please don't suspend me and then SEL from a Distance, is really a proactive approach. And I think the more we can be proactive as teachers, school leaders, school psychologists, whatever, I think is going to be really valuable. So I'm very happy that they took time to be with us, and I'm excited for people to hear this.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, John and Jessica Hannigan are experts in multi-tiered systems of support. They're experts in PBIS. They have several books on those topics with Corwin. And their newest book is SEL from a Distance, which is the topic of this episode. And they are in California. So I hope that everyone enjoys the episode.
So welcome to the Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast, Jessica Hannigan and John Hannigan. How are you both doing?
Doing great, Peter. Good to see you.
Good morning. Good to see you, Peter.
Jessica, did you notice I just gave you top billing? That is the only time that's going to happen. So I just wanted
Actually threw me off for a minute that you introduced me first. So I'm going to remember this moment forever.
I can't help it. John and I have a bromance. I don't know what to tell you.
That's right.
Would you like me to come back? Would you all like
no, it's okay.
After the podcast?
You can absolutely stay. It is so good to see both of you.
Great to see you too.
So good to see you too, Peter.
I miss being able to see you in person. So this is really nice to be able to see you here. Congratulations on the book, SEL from a Distance.
Thank you so much.
So social emotional learning, huge topic. What I think is interesting is that, like, for the Finding Common Ground blog that I've been writing for 10 years for Education Week, prior to COVID, social emotional learning was the topic where I got the most pushback. People were saying there's no place for it in schools. We should focus on academics. And then after COVID hit, suddenly it was Maslow before Bloom. We've got to care about social emotional learning. You both have had such an emphasis on social emotional learning for years, from don't suspend me and being able to look at it from that standpoint. So when you were writing this book, what inspired you to focus on this topic? Was it COVID? Was it just that you knew this was going to be the next thing that you wanted to be able to write about? What inspired you to start writing the book?
Yeah, we saw it in our own kids. So this wasn't even on the radar, really. And then it became probably the number one request from all the schools and districts that we work with. Not just for kids, but for adults. Could you do something around social emotional learning? And so what we did was really just kind of the compilation of all the kind of tools and strategies that we've been using over the years. We just wanted to compile them around those 5 competencies and create a real practical way to you could start implementing these tools tomorrow. And so just seeing how our kids were hurting, I guess previously we'd always consider social emotional learning as, a student who's struggling to, regulate their emotions or things like that. But what we saw with this pandemic was the academic skills that are part of social emotional learning, goal setting, self-monitoring. We saw students aren't logging in, students aren't turning in their work. And then again, we saw it with our own students or our own children that we just thought happened naturally through genetics or simple maturation. It was like, holy smokes, the heck's wrong with you, kid? I thought you don't know how to email your teacher, and things like this, where it's like, holy smokes, kids need to be taught these skills explicitly. If they're lacking them, they need to be provided through as a matter of course and instruction.
Yeah, one of the things that you both get into is actually something that I think is really important, the whole clarity piece behind what does social emotional learning actually mean? So could you talk about that a little bit? What does social emotional learning actually mean?
The common definition that we like to use, and it's adapted from COSL.org, and COSL.org has 30 plus years of research around the science of social emotional learning. They've been doing this before it was the sexy thing to do. Okay, so we really appreciate their work, but we've adapted their definition, and this helps us kind of process, well, what is this going to look like? And the definition is the interrelationship between emotions and behavior, and behaviors and emotions, and our ability to dig into our SEL toolkit and respond to our emotions and behaviors and vice versa, so we could access school and life. And we use that definition. And when you said clarity, that is the number one thing we talk about before you go out to your schools and start saying, now we're going to do SEL and here's what it is. You need to have clarity in what is that common language? What is that common definition that we're going to use? And then we could build on that together.
Yeah, that's part of the problem, isn't it, too, that it's going to become the buzz phrase, the buzz acronym, like social emotional learning. And one of the things that I know that I've often gotten in that pushback with comments from either it's readers or people tweeting or, the thousands ways they can get in contact with us is the fact that, we're too soft. This is just another way that, we're too soft in the United States. We need to be able to, kids need to be tougher. How is social emotional learning not just about making kids soft? Why is that whole philosophy wrong right there with that pushback?
Well, one of the things that we like to do is kind of flip the narrative on them and kind of say, so what are the behaviors you guys are seeing? So what are these students exhibiting? And, or as a leader, what are my teachers complaining to me about most? And to just sit back and let them use that as a therapy session and just start unraveling this. And then to flip that script to say, okay, you're seeing this because the student's lacking this SEL skill. You're seeing this because they're lacking this SEL skill. And we're really, really good at doing that when, the student's a non-fluent reader. They need vowel blends and digraphs to get them back on track reading. But when we have a student who struggles behaviorally, it's usually met with frustration and anger, not, seeing a student lacking a specific skill. And so what we wanted to do is provide that practical way where, the same way we would say numbers and operations is the big Common Core bubble. And then within that, we have multiplying fractions as a skill that's part of numbers and operations. So the same where it's like, the student's lacking social awareness, which would be the big overarching SEL competency, could be, based on these behaviors, the student's lacking the ability to see another's point of view. So then, that would be a sub-skill of perspective taking. And so then to provide them, here's some practical tools that we can use to teach students how to see other people's point of view or perspective taking. So to make it practical, sorry.
And no, just to add to that, there's an abundance of research that has demonstrated those exclusionary practices of we're going to make you tough and we're going to teach you. does not work. And in fact, there's a disproportionality around that kind of work for students with disabilities and students of color. And this has been going on for years. So it does not work. We already have evidence that that does not work. So we really need to take a look at, well, what does? And we're not making kids soft. We're building their agency, their capacity to understand their emotions and behavior so that they can respond when they're faced with adverse situations and respond appropriately. That's what we're actually trying to make them stronger, not weaker when it comes to that argument.
And it also makes me think, as far as because pre-pandemic, SEL was that, it's a block of time, or I have to put in my lesson plan books the last 30 minutes on a Friday to teach some specific lessons, or we teach empathy in the month of April. April's empathy month. There's things like that where it was like a secluded little block of time. But I think now with this pandemic, seeing adults and kids, that we're all in the same boat. We're all feeling this, and we're all seeing what SEL is. It's more than just, deep breathing exercises or, mindfulness or things like that. It's actual skills, academic and social skills that need to be taught. And I always make this comparison to those I don't even know if you were maybe in high school, but those of us that are around like in the late 90s, early 2000s, the way that we would service our English learners, they would go off to the language lab, and the language teacher will provide the functions and forms of language to get them back on track, until No Child Left Behind and AYP came out, and it was like, whoa, we're really missing the boat on the way that we're serving our English learners. And so then the designated, integrated, all those supports throughout the day have now come to be through what was started off as compliance, but it now has changed that movement towards the way we serve our English learners. I think this pandemic has done that now with compassion for social emotional learning, that we're seeing it through a completely different lens than we did prior, that it's not just a block of time. It's not, send someone out to learn some social skills 2 days a week for 30 minutes. It's things that are integrated into what we do.
Yeah, I think what I appreciate about what you both do so well, and you did do this with Don't Suspend Me and all the work that you've done, is that when I look at things like suspension, when I look at things like, right now I've been working with schools that are talking about a high number of Fs that their teachers are giving out to students. It's always this reactive approach to students not showing up, or students are misbehaving, so they need to be suspended. And what I appreciate about the work that you both do is that you always focus on a proactive approach. It's looking and saying, no, social emotional learning isn't about, making kids soft. It's about the fact that we're actually giving them the resources they need, the tools they need to be successful in the future. And I think that that's what's so great about the work that you're doing because of that. Now, when you're talking about Castle's 5 social emotional learning competencies, for people that don't know Castle's work, because maybe pre-COVID, they didn't really see social emotional learning as an issue that they had to work with. What are those 5 SEL competencies that that have been sort of the basis for the book?
So the 5 are relationship skills, responsible decision-making, social awareness, self-management, and self-awareness. Now, what they've done, and we love, is that for each of these competencies, they've even deconstructed them further. What comprises relationship skills? It's not just one skill. There's a lot of components that make up mastery of relationship skills. For example, I'll just give you that one. The deconstructed skills around relationship skills could be teaching communication, social engagement, relationship building, teamwork. So what we did is we took the 5 and then we took the deconstructed components, and with the work that we were doing with educators throughout the nation, we took the best practices and processes around how these educators were integrating these deconstructed standards from a distance and put it in a book that was easy to pick up and use right away. So educators weren't afraid of, I didn't go to school to be a psychologist or a counselor. I didn't, that's not what I wanted to do. Well, this is bringing it to them in a form that's easy to digest, easy to understand, easy to connect with what they're doing. And it gives them a startup menu. And then the goal is, just like Don't Suspend Me, is that you're going to innovate beyond what we gave you, but we're going to give you the start. So that's how we used these core competencies, the deconstructed, to give tools and processes for educators to start right away. And the one thing I want to note is we titled it on purpose, From a Distance, Anytime, Anywhere. Because our thinking was, look, if you could integrate this from a distance, you're going to be just fine integrating this in person or in a hybrid model.
You used the word connect, and I think that was really important. The thing is that because I gave a testimonial for the book, I read it when it was a manuscript. And one of the things that I noticed is that and I think people need to understand, we need to be more purposeful about what we're saying here, because this is, even though it is around social emotional learning, these are directly related to academic skills. They're directly related. When you talk about relationship skills, like that's one that you said, when we think about a very well-used word, collaboration, right? The skills to be able to work in a collective and the confidence to be able to work in collective, those kind of things. Relationship skills are really important. I remember I was doing some research around the skills and confidence to work in collectives to build efficacy among adults. And one of the things is communication skills. Not only how do we communicate, but also about the social sensitivity of the people we are communicating to and how they receive our message. So when we're looking at relationship skills in your book, you're not just talking about the social emotional learning aspect. You're also talking about the fact that we have, in our relationship skills, we have to think about how do we communicate with the kids around us and how do they actually understand and perceive the messages that we're giving. And I think that's what is something that we need to be purposeful about when we're talking about your book. Would you say that's true, John?
Yeah, absolutely. Providing even those structures where even if it's students communicating with other students, when word is in written form, sometimes text can be misinterpreted. And so when we even talk about text, we're not talking about the way that they text message, but just using italicizing, the italicizing of words or bold or caps, can be perceived as being very condescending or yelled at and things like that, that some don't know that, or how that could be misconstrued through written text, but also responding to each other in a discussion thread or different ways that this is, even again, to use that example of, because we have two teenagers that have been going through this. We had a 2020 grad who's a freshman in college, and just seeing in those skills where she was willing to take a 0 because she didn't want to reach out for help to the teacher and say, hey, am I on the right track? And it was due tomorrow. She was probably 85-90% done with the assignment. It was like, well, reach out and email. No, it's fine. I'll just get a 0. And it's like, what? Here we are, the SEL people, and it's like our kids are like a disaster. You know what I mean? And so, but I'm kidding. But she didn't have those skills, and it was like, sit down and let me show you how to. But we talk to high school, middle school teachers all the time that a student reaches out for help, and the entire subject line is the body of the email. And so, I mean, even with the visible learning research, help seeking is such an important tool for student learning, and that takes even social emotional skills. The emotional safety to know that reaching out, that you're going to get that response that you're after, but also the metacognition of knowing where I'm at, where I'm stuck, to seek that help. Mm-hmm. But as an adult, if I shut that interaction down and say, you knew it was due on Wednesday, you've had 2 weeks to, I've now guaranteed that student will never reach out for help again. And so all of these things are all part of just that small little part of relationship skills under the sub skill of communication. But there's just so many, so many aspects to it. So we don't want to try to imply that, oh, well, if you're seeing this, then just do this and oversimplify the process, because it's not. It's a lot of little things that add up to those big changes that we're going to see in our kids.
And let's be clear. I know you're kidding around a little bit when you're talking about your kids, but the reality is, I think that's what makes this all real, because you do have children who are going through this. You are the SEL people who have written a book, and yet you're still seeing that you've got your own kids who are struggling, and you're helping them through there. A mess would be when you don't even recognize it and don't help them through it. And I think that that's what's important, because you're not unlike, and I think the realness is what's important, because these are things that you see within your own children. And then I've got friends who are teachers. I've got friends who are principals. And when I was talking about, ghosting, where the kids were they were showing up to class, but muting themselves, turning the camera off. And I had friends who were principals and teachers who said, yeah, my child's ghosting their teacher. And they were like, and this is happening worldwide. I was talking to somebody in Australia, and she's a researcher and a teacher, and her daughter was learning right next to her. And she said, please excuse my daughter, but she's got to sit next to me during remote learning because she's been ghosting her teacher over the past couple of weeks, and I didn't know it. So, I think it's important to talk about this kind of stuff, John, because people have this perception that we're really perfect when we write books and that we have all the answers, when the reality is the desire to write the book comes from something very internal, or comes from our family, or comes from something we're curious about and we want to learn more. We're not writing it just from the expertise level. We're writing it from the curiosity. We want to do something about it level too. And that need comes from a variety of places. One of the things that I know that you do, and not only in the books that you write, but I've seen you present, you do have frameworks that people can look at, which I think are really important. People, from a practitioner side, I think people really like to see frameworks, because they need to see more than the research, right? They need to see how is this going to work in my school? So when you've got these SEL competency implementation frameworks, but how are they meant to sort of help avoid the common missteps with the typical implementation of social emotional learning? Does that make sense? Like, how do your frameworks actually help people avoid those common missteps that they often find, like with, hey, we're going to do social emotional learning on Friday or in April? How does that help?
And I'll begin, and then I'll let John add to what we really strive to do is take theory into practice. We both have a researcher background as well, but we pride ourselves more in our practitioner background and how we could take the complex and make it doable for educators out there doing this work. And so you're right. Our why for writing this book was exactly what you said. Our hearts were hurting. We wanted to help. We noticed an increased level of depression, anxiety, excessive stress, overwhelmed feelings. And it was not just for the students, it was also for the adults. And so as we were doing this work, we compiled it into a frame that was easy to process. And the SEL competency implementation framework has 3 phases: prioritize, mastery, and then the actual SEL teaching process. So to begin, prioritize is there's a lot here to teach and digest. So where are we going to begin? Where is a competency that we feel is our priority right now? And how could we get on the same page of what that looks like? Second is mastery. What do we want to see then? If this is our narrative, if this is our precise problem statement at the moment, and this is a high need, well, what do we want to see those students doing? And we need a mastery rubric for that. And ultimately, we want our students demonstrating this independently. That's our ultimate goal. So in life, they know how to do this when they're faced with these kinds of emotions or adverse situations. And then the last part is the SEL teaching teaching process. Just like we teach an academic core standard or skill, we need to be really intentional about teaching an actual SEL competency as well.
And so that's where, I mean, we've gone to a lot of conferences. We've seen a lot of things where it's like, as principals or teachers, where it's like, man, that's great. And then we get back in our classrooms or on our campus, it's like, where do I start? Mm-hmm. And so what we wanted to do with that, with prioritize, mastery, and then teach is we gave that forced rank protocol, like, okay, what are the behaviors you guys are seeing? And then just rank them there. That's your start point. That doesn't mean you're going to completely ignore the other things. It just, you now have a start point. Okay, well, let's get clarity around what will mastery of this skill look like. And we're not talking about wordsmith and a vision statement over 2 weeks kind of thing. It's just like, okay, what would a proficient student look like, emerging and then not quite there yet, and just like a quick process, not, let's operationally define motivation or things like that, it's like, who cares? Like, let's do something. And so that's where with prioritize mastery, something that I like to always do is connect it to what's familiar with teachers is the way that we teach. Okay, we still have our essential learning targets that we unpack into those learning targets. We then have clarity around what mastery of that skill would look like. So if Jess and I are a fourth grade team teaching order of operations, as we get to that assessment, we're going to be crystal clear of what a proficient student in order of operations will look like. If she says 6 out of 10 is mastery and I say 8 out of 10, or she lets her kids use calculators and I don't, we can't have that incongruence of what mastery looks like. So the same really applies here. We're just connecting it to, the skill of, a student who's not turning in homework or whatever that case may be. And then how are we going to teach it? And so we like to, again, just provide that practical approach, because so many times we get, how do you operationally define motivation? And then we get stuck for 2 weeks doing nothing. And it's like, who cares? No child has ever been harmed in giving them a tool, learning a new SEL skill. So if we said, respecting diversity is what we set out for, yet we taught them how to, taught them empathy, that's not going to harm anyone. So the red flag is not doing anything or just being stuck trying to operationally define something. It's like, do something.
What I think is, so there are lots of books that talk about what adults need to be doing with students. Your book is different in a way that you specifically actually have tools in here that students need to be doing for themselves. And I think, so that's very interesting, because it's not just about what the adults need to be doing. It's about, here's a tool that a student can actually use. And you have things like student self-check survey. Why did you do that? Why did you go beyond just adults, this is what you need to do with students, and be able to say, this is specifically students, we need you to do this too?
Well, ultimately, our outcome is that we are producing, contributing, productive civil members in our community. And so we need them to have opportunity to learn these skills, build their inner toolkit, their SEL toolkit, so that they could generalize it. I remember it was so frustrating for teachers too. They were pulled out for an SEL skill and they were being awarded for, for 30 minutes, we worked on this skill, but they couldn't generalize it in the classroom or in an unstructured setting. So there was this frustration of, okay, yeah, they're getting this intervention, but they're not demonstrating it. And so our goal was to make sure that we're building the capacity of our students to recognize these, remember the definition, their feelings, their emotions, and be able to pull in their toolkit. And this is the only way how. We need to have them be part of the solution, and they need to have a voice and choice in this, or else they're not going to be engaged in the learning of these skills as well. And then ultimately, the teachers need to understand that our job isn't just to tell them to do this. We need them to have opportunities to practice and generalize these skills. And guess what? We need to demonstrate them too as the adults, because they are watching us. We can't ask our students to respond appropriately or turn work in on time or speak with respect, and then we're not doing the same. So it's designed to get the adults also thinking about their SEL behaviors as well. So they need to demonstrate it as they're teaching it.
And you brought up the Maslow's before Bloom's. Maslow's, before it was the hierarchy, it was the ladder of motivation for really human motivation, like adults, kids, anyone. That's the ladder of motivation. And so when we think of self-motivation, and the highest rung on that ladder is motivation to provide those tools and resources, which kind of leads into just our own emotional intelligence, being aware of where we're at and what we need to be able to accomplish, our tasks, our goals. And we have an alt-ed high school that we're working with that absolutely loves that tool and created a Google Doc from that, where students on their tablets drag whatever the green, orange, or red check mark to where they are on each of those. And there's been weeks during this pandemic where, I'm not gonna lie, heading into the week, I'm like, it ain't happening. I'm burned out. I'm redlining. And when you start thinking then of that ladder of motivation with Maslow's, that basic, those physiological, where when I went to teacher school to get my credential and all that stuff, I just thought, oh, okay, shelter, air, okay, am I breathing? Do I have a roof over my head? But no, this pandemic's really shown, am I getting 7 hours of sleep? Am I drinking 6 glasses of water? Am I getting outside to the sun just hit my face for 30 minutes, go for a walk? That's all based on those physiological or those needs being met before I can go to that next rung. And it was an eye opener when even filling out that little self-motivator for me, and I was orange or red on all of them. And then I went straight back to Bloom's or Maslow's with the 7 hours sleep, 6 glasses of water. And I was no on all those things. So that's where, hitting that point of burnout, checking those basic needs, that self-care, but that all leads to that motivation piece too.
Well, I think the thing about those self-regulation tools that you implement, that you use in the book, those are really good for metacognitive skills for the students as well, because metacognitively they have to think about their own reactions and those kind of things. That's only going to benefit the future as well. I know we're going to be wrapping it up soon. So the book's, it's end of March, and we know people, much to what John was just saying, people are tired, they're burned out. One of the things that I heard it last spring, I heard it this spring, is we just have to get through this. And that's going to lead to issues in the fall as well, where everybody's talking about build back better. And I'm thinking about the fact that, well, if we stopped looking at just getting through this over the next couple of months, we wouldn't have to build back better so much, right, in the fall. How can this book help people in both scenarios? Like, one thing that you think, how can this book help people right now during the spring to sort of get through those hard moments, John, that you were referring to earlier?
Well, that it's really 30 pages of content and 100 pages of tools that we wanted to provide something that you can get down and dirty with it tomorrow, today, not based on a bunch of theory and things like that then you have to, how's this going to fit for me? And so we like to compare it to like a cookbook. So if we got the same Paula Deen cookbook, Jess might get after the green bean casserole, I might get after the meatloaf. We're all going to go to a different recipe, and the same applies here. So it's not like, okay, when you get this book, make sure you turn to this page and open this tool. That it's just based on identifying what those needs are of our students. Because right now, everyone listening to this, you can just close your eyes and think, okay, I see Brandon, and this is what Brandon is struggling with. I see that, or as a class, or as a department, or as a school, these are the challenges that we're facing. So using that basically that 3-step process based on the framework, prioritizing, okay, where are we going to start? Then let's get some clarity around, okay, what will mastery look like of a student, and then how are we going to go out and teach it? But not that we have to go out and buy some curriculum in order to teach it, but just by, if metacognition is one of them, follow up with a little buddy, what strategy helped you come to that? That's metacognition. It's not like we have to get some curriculum to teach us. So the practicality of it, that do something now and experiment, and what works for Billy won't work for Brandon. So just knowing that it's not just, oh, if you see this, then just do this. We wanted to provide, an abundance of tools and resources so that people can get after it and start supporting kids now. And you can even apply them to as adults too. You can modify any of these to help our own. God knows I have.
Yeah. And Jessica, what about those people that are listening and saying, this is a social emotional book for COVID. It's not for the fall. It's not for building back better. When we're talking about rekindling engagement, when you look at this book and you think, okay, John just spoke to the importance of being able to read the here and now. What about in the fall when schools are coming back? Why should they open up this book and start paying attention to it?
Well, I think it's evident in what we've been seeing and how we feel and our students feel that SEL is no longer just a thing to do. It needs to be a priority just as much as any other academic initiative that is taking place in a school. I think one thing that's come out of this is that's been really clear. Now, the hard part for some is thinking about how are they going to integrate SEL in their existing behavior systems and in their behavior SEL teams. How are they going to actually make this sustainable and not just the Band-Aid right now? How are we going to make this a systemic implementation based on behavior and SEL data, not just referral data, but perception data of our students, and continuously be focusing on this. So I guess my answer is right now, that's great, but really right now should have demonstrated for us that there is no other way. There is no other way that we could fully engage the whole child if we ignore that piece. And if you don't mind, I have a few student quotes, and that kind of tells me the why of this work. I'll read a few. My teacher told our class, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here for you. This was powerful to hear. I have never had a teacher say that to an entire class before. That's a 12th grader. I love learning about my teacher and classmates. It has helped me see how much I have in common with other students. That's an 8th grader. Taking the time to say welcome and good morning to each student makes a huge difference in our day. 5th grader. My teacher helps us learn how to problem solve as a classroom community. I like it when my teacher stays after the class session and answers questions. I love it when my teacher helps us learn how to stay organized with reminders and check-ins. My teacher helps us use strategies to relax our brains when we are feeling stressed. These are all real life testimonials from students during this time. What makes us think that these students don't need that every day? So anyway, to answer your question, the L in SEL is for learning. And if we want our students to learn it, then we need to intentionally teach it like we teach anything else at our school.
That is a good way to end. Jessica Hannigan and John Hannigan, thank you. The book is SEL from a Distance. Thank you for being a part of the Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast. Always good to see you.
Always great to see you.
Thank you for having us, Peter.
Yeah, so Ariel, one of the things that I enjoyed about talking to them is that they're very real in their approach, and they mention their own kids, and John was mentioning their own kids, and I think that's good, because what people need to understand is the pandemic, social emotional learning. It's difficult for everybody, even quote unquote experts that might be writing about the topic. But one thing that I like about their book is that they have a lot of these frameworks. And I mentioned this in the podcast, obviously, but it is something I want to highlight now. Many people write books about student learning, but they don't have a component for the student in the book. And what I thought it was interesting about SEL from the Distance is that they actually have frameworks in there that students themselves are supposed to be filling out. So not only are they talking about social emotional learning of students, but they're also including students within the book. in a very direct and intentional way. And I think that's just such a good practice. I think more people need to do that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I love that Jessica talked about how this isn't just for times when you are at a distance. And like she said, if you can do these skills from a distance, you can do them all the time, anywhere. It's a good baseline. If you know it works virtually, then you know it's going to work in person too. And so I love how practically these things can be applied as a lot of schools transition back to being, full-time in person, or some sort of hybrid situation. I love that these tools and these skills are so flexible.
Yeah, that's going to be hard for you as an editor, isn't it? Because when you think about the books that those of us who write put out, there are people potential readers, educators that are going to look and say, oh, that's a pandemic book. That's a non-pandemic book. That's a pre-pandemic book. That's a post-pandemic book, those kind of things. And it's got to be difficult as an editor to be able to find a balance between both of those, to have the insight to be able to say, this is good for the here and now, but also have the foresight to be able to look and say, this is going to be a book that's going to be valuable when schools are all back in person in the fall.
Yeah. Well, just like everyone else, we've had to learn how to be really flexible and adaptable. We've moved into this, more agile publishing model, which is something that, we didn't see coming for a long time. But it's, COVID has pushed us, just like it's pushed everyone else, to get better at a lot of things, to get faster at a lot of things. And it's made us a lot more responsive to what people's needs are right now. And I think ultimately that's a good thing. It's definitely made our lives more challenging as publishers and as an editor, for sure. But, it's going to be good for people. And that's really the hope.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ariel.
Once again, thanks, Peter.
That was a good interview. I always enjoy when I can learn things when I'm moderating a conversation with people. So until next time, Ariel.
Thanks. And for those listening, be sure to leave us a review on iTunes and subscribe on Apple, Google, or Spotify, or watch us on YouTube. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone.